Loosey-goosey. Loosey-goosey. Oh, fuck, my back. My back is cracked. Why am I so old now? Ugh.
Are you a uni student or an early professional with no real time, money, or skills? You've come to the right goddamn place. Welcome to The Bad Chef. Fast and cheap meals for fast and cheap people.
My name is Chi, and I'm a bad chef. Yeah, welcome to date night. Now, as a single man, I may have forgotten that couples existed and that they go on dates as well. So, if you're not going to die alone, this one's for you. Mind you though, today we're not going to be cooking something that's dainty. This is not like a polite knife and fork sort of meal for people who are still a little bit nervous around their dates. This is a hands-on, eat until your heart is full sort of meal. And there's no meal that feeds the heart and your stomach better than a gigantic rack of pork ribs. I hear it, I'm hearing you say it. You're saying, oh no, Chi, ribs, that's not suitable food for a date. It's messy. Excuse me. This food isn't suitable for a date. You're not suitable for a date. I mean, a date shouldn't be pretentious. The first and foremost priority of a date is that you should be comfortable, you should be having fun, and you should be eating well, preferably all three at the same time. So, if you like your partner enough to cook for them, you should be cooking something that's a little bit more invested, but it still allows them to let their hair down a little bit. So you shouldn't be aiming for the Bolshoi ballet, you should be aiming for a little bit more rock and roll, you know? So yeah, buckle up, dickheads, because today we're going to cook a fat rack of ribs. Now, ribs are conventionally smoked or barbecued, which is all very excellent. But if you live in a glorified storage container and you don't have a balcony to have a smoker or a barbecue, I'm going to show you a way to do ribs so tender they'll fall off the bone under their own weight, all within the limits of a bog standard domestic kitchen. Now, ribs are an incredible cut of meat, mostly because these intercostals, they're not exactly a high stress muscle group, so they're ridiculously tender. And couple that with the fact that they're encased in a layer of fat, you have a cut of meat that doesn't dry out, but instead spanks your taste buds with handfuls of flavor. So yeah, today we're going to be using pork ribs. You could use beef ribs if you want, they're actually a bit cheaper as well. It's exactly the same process, but they tend to shrink on the bone a little bit. So to avoid that, we're going to use pork ribs today. Now, how we're going to cook these ribs today is by a process called reverse-braising. So what that entails, we're going to slow cook these ribs for about 4 to 8 hours in a flavor base at a super low temperature. We're going to take it out, baste it in a sauce, and then finish it off in the grill. So that way, we'll have outrageously tender ribs with a gorgeously charred finish. Now, the process itself isn't particularly challenging, but there are a lot of ingredients.
What you'll need is, bear with me, 2 racks of pork ribs, 2 liters of Coca-Cola, some neutral oil like canola, 2 brown onions, an entire garlic, 1 small chili, a bit of dark soy sauce, paprika, chili powder, allspice, a bit of garlic powder, bay leaves, some star anise or some dark spices like cardamom or coriander seeds if you have, 60 grams of butter, 1 tablespoon of tomato paste, a 1/4 cup of sugar, a 1/4 cup of maple syrup or honey, a splash of bourbon if you want, Worcestershire sauce, a tablespoon of seeded mustard, and as always, salt and pepper to taste. The shopping list is in the description if you need, but as for the spices, they're pretty much the same ones from the chili from S2E11, so the only odd one out would be the allspice.
Wait, Chi, did you just say Coca-Cola back there? Why, yes I did. Because Coca-Cola is actually a really good sweet stock for slow cooking. It has a bunch of carbonic acid in it which helps the flavor penetrate into the meat. And plus, the flavor of Coke itself actually has a dark spice tilt to it. So it works really well for something like sticky glazed ribs. And speaking of glaze, get the full sugar version, always, because a no sugar version, it just burns and smells acrid and it's kind of shitty, and it needs the sugar to glaze. So full sugar only full sugar. Now, about the pork ribs, it's worth noting that pork ribs usually have this sinewy membrane behind it. So check if it's there. If it's there, I'd make a point to take it off. But since we're slow cooking it for ages, it doesn't actually matter that much, so it's entirely up to you. You might also have to cut up the ribs so that they'll actually fit in the pot. And if they fit in the pot, they'll fit on a plate of the same size. But if you want the ribs to come out like a big gigantic xylophone of meat, you could use a baking tray covered in some foil. It'll work exactly the same way. So tonight I'm also only cooking 1 rack of ribs because I'm only cooking for 1 person. But the butcher gave me an extra offcut as well for free because he's a goddamn champion. So we're gonna cook it in the same way, and it'll turn out amazingly because that's the part where all the soft bones are, and they're gonna cook down until they're so gelatinous you wouldn't believe it. Anyway, let's go.
First, cut up the onions, garlic, and chili. Take half of them and brown them off in a large pot with some oil. Season your pork with salt and pepper, then sear it off in a separate pan. When that's done, layer the pork ribs into an oven-proof pot. Pour in just enough Coke to submerge it, then save the rest for the sauce later. Bring to a boil, then reduce the heat and add in the rest of the parboiling ingredients, which include a dash of dark soy sauce, a tablespoon of paprika, a tablespoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of chili, a teaspoon of allspice, 2 bay leaves, and 2 star anise. Let that simmer for a bit while you preheat the oven to 90 degrees C. Then, move your pot to the oven. Cover and slow cook for 4 to 8 hours.
Yeah, so at this point in time, the ribs are pretty much an autopilot, so you could go about your day without a care in the world until it's time to make the sauce. Now, the sauce has a really similar ingredient makeup as the rest of the flavor base, so when you're doing the prep for the flavor base, it's worth doing the prep for the sauce at the same time.
Get the rest of the onions, garlic, and chili that you cut before and brown them off in the oil and butter. Add in 1 tablespoon of tomato paste, a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of maple syrup, a generous amount of Worcestershire sauce, let's say about 10 dashes, 1 tablespoon of seeded mustard, 2 bay leaves, 2 star anise, 1 teaspoon of allspice, garlic powder, chili, and paprika, a shot of bourbon, about a teaspoon each of the ground up cardamom and coriander seeds, and salt and pepper to season. Then add as much Coke as you feel sufficient. Usually it's about a cup. Bring to the boil, reduce the heat, and simmer until it's reduced to the consistency you like.
Alright, so with the sauce, there are 3 notes to this. The first one is that you should always taste it as you go along, make adjustments as you will. The sauce isn't a very exact science, so you can afford to show a little personality with it. The second point is that if you don't want to buy maple syrup, you could substitute equal amounts of honey with it, or just add more sugar. The honey would be good though, because it helps everything glaze, but it burns really easily, so you should monitor it while you're doing the grill. And the third point is that if you want to cheat a little bit, you could use standard barbecue sauce in place of the tomato pastes. The barbecue sauce actually has some emulsifiers, some thickeners, and some liquid smoke in it, and it will assist the flavor and help everything gel together a lot more. But it is cheating a little bit. However, it's not going to taste anything like the barbecue sauce because the rest of the ingredients in there will give it the complexity and character that it needs. Now, the sauce seems to have reduced down to a pretty reasonable consistency, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover that, chuck it into the hot box as well to let the flavors develop for the next couple of hours. And in the meantime, I'm going to go to the gym to exercise my fat ass. So, yeah, I'll see you in a bit. What's going on? I'm back. Anyway, these ribs have been in there for about 4 hours now, so it is time to lift them out of the pot, baste them, and then grill them to finish.
When the ribs have slow cooked for about 4 to 8 hours, you're ready to baste with the sauce and finish on the grill. Take out the pot from the oven and gently remove the ribs onto a grill tray. And be careful here because they'll be fall off the bone tender. Baste generously with the sauce. Then, chuck them into the oven on the grill setting or at 250 degrees C to caramelize the surface for about 5 to 10 minutes. Keep an eye on it though to make sure that it doesn't burn. But when that's done, it's time to plate up.
Now, when the ribs come out of the grill, they're going to look a little bit lonely on the plate, so we're going to pair it with something. Usually it pairs really well with steak cut chips or a potato salad, but if you want some fiber in your diet, I can recommend an American-style chipotle slaw or the fennel and apple salad from season 1, episode 3. But since our recipe's for another day, I'm just gonna use this prepackaged shit. That one's kale slaw, and it's surprisingly good if you have low standards.
There aren't really any rules to plating, so just put everything onto a plate, put some sauce to the side, make everything look nice, and then you're pretty much done.
Alright, you ready for this? Hopefully, my dreams will come. Oh my god, look at that. Come on. Come on! Oh my god. Do you see what's happening here? Do you see what this is? Holy shit, dude. Man, I'm unfuckwittable. I'd date me. Fuck, I'd marry me. I'd marry me so hard. Oh, Jesus Christ. Like, I know I said this wasn't a knife and fork sort of meal before, but there's no bones in it anymore. You can totally get away with using a fork and a knife. Of course, it's not exactly like a smoked or a barbecued rack of ribs, but it is an entirely different type of gratification altogether. I mean, first is the tenderness. It's just, it's beyond belief. It's on an entirely different scale. And then, yeah, the flavor, we slow cooked it in a flavor base, so it's still juicy on the inside, it's sweet in the top notes, and it's still punchy and bassy in the bottom because of all the dark spices that we used. And then the soft bones, oh my god, you see that? That's actually melted. And it's absorbed all the flavor from the flavor base. So it's just punching that flavor right into your face. Whew. This isn't a sexy meal by any means, especially when you're smeared in as much sauce as the ribs are themselves. But if you're looking for the most amount of unbridled and shameless joy from a meal, it's gotta be this right here. Because this is not really a first date sort of meal, right? This is a meal for people who have heard each other fart. It's a meal for people who know how to let their hair down and enjoy themselves in the company of others, even in complete silence. It's a meal for people who are good at the pursuit of happiness. And if it's happiness you're after, it doesn't really matter if you're single or not. You deserve to eat ribs like these. Right, in other notes, you're going to be left with a pot full of flavor base. So if you find it a bit wasteful to chuck it all out, you can actually let it cool down, put it in a Ziploc bag and freeze it. It'll be good for another 1 or 2 cooks, but since the Coke's already decarbonated, it takes the edge off it a little bit. So it won't taste exactly the same. Also, you'll find that the slow cook renders out a lot of the pork fat. So if you're a little bit calorie conscious in the next couple of cooks, you can skim off all the fat before you freeze it. In terms of costs, the flavor base and the sauce together were about $9 in total, and each kilogram of ribs should be about 16 Australian dollars per kilo, or 20 if you get the free range one. So if you're planning for about 700 to 800 grams of ribs per person, expect to spend about $22 to $26 on ribs, which means that everything together here was about 35 bucks in total. And if you consider the same equivalent full rack of pork ribs at a Sydney CBD restaurant, they're going to be charging $65 each, which means that 2 racks is $130. $130, that's 4 times the price. And that's before you even consider recycling the flavor base. But aside from that, that's pretty much it. Fill your girl's stomach and fill your girl's heart with a full rack of pork ribs. Because if all goes well, her stomach and her heart won't be the only thing you're filling later on that night. You'll be filling your sleep quotas, because you'll both be in a food coma. I mean, you'll be too tired to do anything else. It's a pretty heavy meal, this one. Anyway, this was reverse braised Coca-Cola pork ribs. Done.